Right. Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. My name's Emma Bull from the Consumer Duty Alliance, and I'm delighted to welcome you to our webinar on 5 plain language techniques. This will be hosted by Frances Gordon. So thanks so much for joining us, Frances.
Thank you. And thank you so much for the invitation. I'm so pleased to be here today.
No, we're delighted to have you. So I'll just give you a bit of intro about Frances's background. She is Director of Narratology, which is a financial services, content and training consultancy. She's also a UK ambassador for PLAIN, which is a global plain language association across 50 different countries. She's an expert contributor to the British Standards Association on ISO standards, which is essentially the best practice rules for plain language. So she's really contributed to essentially writing the rule book on that. She's got 25 years experience supporting both small and larger organisations, including names like Barclays and Zurich, with their plain language content. The reason that I naturally know Frances is that she is one of our Consumer Duty practitioner panel members. So she has very kindly offered some of her expertise pro bono to actually helping us with our own advisor guides and content. So we're very grateful for that. So when she offered to host this webinar, we were delighted to accept. I'll just give you a bit of information about the how it's going to run today. So it's going to be 45 minutes, which will be structured across 5 different techniques. There's interaction throughout, so you can see the comments on the right-hand side, which is like a speech bubble. Please interact as we go throughout. There will be time for questions at the end, so if you've got any questions, whack them in the chat and we will come back to them when the workshop is finished. At the end of the session, you will receive a CPD certificate via email. You will also receive the recording, and we will then send you the slides and the checklist that Frances is going to show you. So I think it's a really good session. I hope you enjoy, and I'm going to hand you over to Frances now.
Thank you very much, Emma. As Emma said, please add your comments in the chat as we're going. At certain times of this presentation, I'll be asking for questions. I'll be asking some questions and you can put your answers in the chat as well. So the webinar is called From Complex to Clear, 5 plain language techniques in 45 minutes. What is this webinar about? Well, the idea is to give everyone in your firm a place to start with writing clearly, with plain language. And if you know anything about clear communication, you probably know there's many different aspects. You have to research your readers. You have to know how to write, how to design, when and when not to use AI. You need to know how to use a test and how to research whether things are actually working. And then there's the whole field of governance. This webinar is not even going to touch sides on all the different issues because that's not the aim. What we're really trying to do here is just give you 5 quick and easy ways to improve the way you communicate with your clients. So it's quite fast moving. It's very practical. But if you have got questions and comments as we go through it, please contribute in the comments section. So I do a lot of user testing, which means I go around and show financial documents to people from all walks of life, from different people with different levels of financial capability, people who are very sophisticated investors, people who are just starting on their investment journeys. And I often get some kind of comment like the one on the screen. Something like, well, when I'm thinking about my finances, there's like a brick wall between me and the information that's sent to me. It's difficult to engage with the communications that are sent to me about my finances. And this question comes from lots of different users in lots of different situations. And when I probe why there's this feeling, I often get comments like this. I don't want to read this right now. So people might feel, well, this communication doesn't apply to me at this moment. I don't want to open this email. I don't want to page through this document. And we're going to look at one technique for addressing this problem. And this technique is how to make your communications relevant from the start. The next comment I often get is, why can't the communications just get to the point? What is this about? And the technique we're going to look at to address this point is how to write good headings. The next comment will be very familiar, I think, to people who explaining financial concepts. There's just too much jargon to wade through. And we're going to address that by showing some tips and techniques for writing familiar words, for using familiar words. The next thing I hear quite often is, why do I have to read this twice or more to understand? And often this is because we simply write in really long sentences. So I'm going to give you some tips and techniques to make your sentences shorter and simpler so people can read them once and understand what you're trying to communicate. And finally, I get lots of comments that there's so much information out there. How do I know what to trust? And we'll be looking at one little technique to address this point, which is providing support for decisions. So that's the introduction. And so these are the 5 points we're going to try and go through in the next couple of minutes. Make it relevant, use good headings, use familiar words, write simple sentences, and give support for decisions. So the first point is a really easy point because it's so straightforward, but sometimes we forget to do it. We tell the reader why we're writing to them. This means every time you write a letter or you write an email, you open up with the purpose and the main action for the reader. And when we're writing something, there's only a couple of basic purposes we have. We want to explain something, we want to update our clients about something, or we want to ask for a decision. Sometimes we might be tempted to put the reader actions, what we need them to do, right at the end of the communication. But to make things really relevant, I'd suggest you put that right up front with your purpose as well. And the main actions might be simply to read and understand. There might not be an actual action the reader needs to take, but even reading and understanding is something you want them to do. So you tell them that. You might want them to give information to you, or you might want them to make a decision or need them to make a decision. So, for example, the structure of this, I'm writing to you to summarize the recommendations that we discussed at last week's meeting. Please confirm if you'd like to go ahead. So we're opening up with the purpose and the main action. For educational content, we position this slightly differently. So this is when we're sending out an explainer perhaps to a whole lot of our clients. Here we structure it as who the information is for, and then straight away why the reader needs to read it. So let's look at these 2 points, 2 examples. If you plan on retiring abroad, so straight away in those very first words, I'm already reassuring the reader that this is relevant to them by telling them who the information is for. And then we go straight on to what the reader is going to get out of it. Make sure you take care of your pension well before you leave. That way there won't be any surprises down the road. The next one, first-time buyers. Again, in the first 3 words, we assure the readers of the relevance. We assure the readers that they need to read this right now by telling them who it's for. And then we go, here's a step-by-step guide to getting a mortgage, so you'll know what to expect at each stage. Our next point, going straight into things, is to write good headings. And headings are not there for decoration. They're not there to be catchy. They really need to tell us what's in the paragraph beneath them. So I've got a little bit of an exercise here for you. It's not really an exercise, but I just want you to tell me what's wrong with these headings and write some ideas in the chat of what's wrong with these headings. I've got a heading called Notes. I've got a heading called Important Increase. And I've got a heading called The First Item on Your Budget. So if you imagine a document and you imagine these as headings on your document, too vague, Nitesh, absolutely correct. We often think that we're kind of just writing a placeholder for a heading, but we need to use of what. Excellent feedback. Well done. They don't tell us what's in the paragraph below them. So we need to say something like, instead of notes, our responsibilities, tell people what's in the paragraph beneath it. Important increase, fee increases this year. The first item on your budget, debt repayments are the first budget item. So we don't kind of build suspense. We're not writing a detective novel here. This is one of the reasons why, for writing really clearly, we often think it's good to have questions and answers. But I always tell people, try to put the answer in the heading rather than the question in the heading. So instead of saying, what next? You could say, next step, apply for this fund, or whatever it is. So instead of asking the question in the heading, we actually give the answer in the heading. And I always make sure that people understand that you never build suspense. You always just tell people the answer straight away, because when somebody receives that piece of communication, they want to just get to the point really quickly. They want to be able to skim their document really quickly. So that's what headings are all about. You'll find that in the literature about clear communication, they often talk about layering, which allows the reader to skim things and to get the gist and then slowly get to the detail. And the easiest way to do layering is just to use good headings. We often think of really fancy words for simple things, right? Like layering, we just mean headings. We need good design so we can slowly get the gist of a document before we read the detail. So here's another little thing. How many words can a heading have as a maximum? So 1 would be 1 or 2 words, 2 would be up to 4 words, and 3 would be, there's no upper limit, but keep to a line, more or less. What do you think? You're all very good at this. 6 words, very specific. Oh, some people have said 2 words, up to 4 words. Well, it really depends on what level of heading you're talking about. So if you're writing a longer document, I would say your top level of headings are a little bit shorter, probably up to 4 words. But when we're getting to the actual paragraph level of your documents, it's really more like 3. We want to keep to a line, but I'm not really worried about having them that short. And let me show you an example. So this example is thanks to the wonderful team at Cohesion Financial Solutions and Claire Mellon in particular, who really, I should have thanked her at the beginning because she's given me great feedback and great examples for this presentation. So thank you, Claire. And I want to point out that what you see on the screen is not a final version of everything, because obviously it's missing something really important, which is headings. It's really a wall of text. So this is what you don't want anything to be sent out. It's just a letter. So some people go, well, it's just a letter. Why can't people read it? Why can't I send it out like this? And the reason you can't is a reader will not read it. They'll say they can't get the gist quickly enough. They'll say it's boring. They'll say you're not getting to the point. And the easiest way to rectify this, as a Cohesion knows, is to add your headings in. And now you notice that if you get this, the reader can simply read the headings to understand the gist. Financial wellness means that you feel in control of your finances. You can make informed choices without feeling rushed. A good financial planner should guide you to financial well-being, and it's your personal ongoing journey. So this is just a letter, but what we try and do is use these types of longer descriptive headings for technical content as well. And it's the exact same principle. It's so that the reader can skim read the document and get the gist without diving into the detail. So it is like this layered approach where you read the top layer first and you go, well, that's quite interesting. Now I'll dive in to the detail inside of it. You need to present your headings in a way that clearly stands out. I've used color here, but I've also used spacing. And one of the core spacing ideas behind headings, this is a very useful idea, is that you'll always have more space before a heading than after a heading. So if you think about that principle of more space before a heading than after a heading, your heading will always kind of hug the description below it. It always kind of looks into, it belongs with the paragraph beneath it. And the reader's eyes then sees that as a chunk of content, and it just makes sense to the reader. And that's what you want. So always think of the principle, more space above the heading than below the heading, and you'll have a beautifully structured document. So this really helps the reader skim read and get the idea of the document. I'm seeing a couple of people have a frozen presentation. You can perhaps just try another browser, but I know you will get a recording afterwards at worst. Right, so we did the headings, that idea of layering the information, and the simplest way of layering is to use our good headings and make them stand out. Now we're well on our way to making things plain, and we have to start using familiar words. Start using clear words. And when we are financial planners and in finance, our mind immediately goes to the dreaded jargon and technical words, because that's what people talk about, right? I don't understand financial jargon, or I don't know how to explain financial jargon. And finance does have a lot of jargon, just like legal has a lot of jargon. These are words that have a very specific, often technical meaning, and you'll all be familiar with those. There's another set of difficult words that are just unnecessarily complex words. So these are words that have no specific technical meaning, but we just use them perhaps to sound fancy. The problem with using the complex words is that they increase cognitive load, and they make all our writing start sounding very, very heavy. And then that makes the jargon even more difficult for the reader to understand. So I'm first going to talk a little bit about these complex words, and then we'll talk a little bit about the jargon, because I do think that we can solve a lot of the word problem by just looking at these unnecessarily complex words. So let's look at some complex words and see what we can do about that. So more for you to type into chat. I see a great question. I'm going to answer this question first from Claire, and then I will go back to do this. So while I'm answering the question, you can think about what you can replace kindly verify with. When we're talking about writing in a familiar way, we often start thinking about using contractions in our document. So contractions are words like can't or won't or I'm. So I'm stands for I am, and can't stands for cannot, and won't stands for will not. And often we ask, well, can we use these more casual words? The answer is that absolutely. For the simpler contractions like I'm or where, it's quite nice to use the more familiar form of the word. And the same for can't. So it would sound odd if you say, I can't make the meeting next week, and instead you said, I cannot make the meeting next week. It would sound a bit overly formal. There are a couple of exceptions. So if you're writing a really technical document and you need to emphasize, say, an exclusion, I would then use the word not to really make it clear that you're getting across the exclusion, and you reducing the possibility of the reader just skim reading can't and not actually understanding there's a negative. So like all of things, it's a little bit nuanced. You can use contractions for the less formal communication, but when you're talking about something like an exclusion where you really want to emphasize the negative, then you might want to use the word not rather than can't or won't. Another one, I'll need to know. So absolutely. So you are all writing your answers now for kindly verify. And I'll need to know your postal and email address. That's good. Please tell us your postal and email address. Very good. Review and confirm your postal address. And then I've got please check. Now that's the one I went with too. I also went with please check. your postal and email address. So I use please check because I think that's simple. So I hope that none of us are ever going to write kindly again, because we just mean please, and we don't use that in everyday language, do we? We don't go to the to the supermarket and say, kindly give me something. You say please. So we can just use normal language. And although everyone understands the word kindly or verify, it just adds to the cognitive load of our communication. So the next red bit is postal and email address details. So let's see what you can improve. We all often put the word details in things that we don't really need the word details. It's just this extra word we put in when we don't need it. Your contact details we could put, absolutely. That would be a way of doing it. I chose something a little bit different. I said your postal and email addresses because I'm being very conservative here. I don't want anybody to say I've lost the meaning, because the whole point of plain language is we must keep the exact meaning. So I kept it a little bit more conservative, and I still said your postal and email addresses, but maybe we could actually try and go the post and email addresses or even the contact details. Absolutely. But we don't need address details, right? We can shorten that. And you all got that, which is brilliant. The next one is commencement, and someone's already got start. Well done. Very quick. And we have someone's already even jumped. So before the start. So we never need to say commencement. We can always just say start. We never need to say termination. We can always say end. These are just complex words. They have no specific technical meaning. And unfortunately, as I said, in English, we have so many unnecessarily complex words that for some reason, when we talk about money or when we talk about legal things, we start using. So we need to get out of that habit, and we can just use our familiar words. And I love that. I did the same thing. I realized, well, the start of our meeting is the same as before our meeting, so we can shorten it. So this is the first pass at using familiar words. And I'm sure you'll all agree it's really easy to replace unnecessarily complex words. Yet I challenge you after this to go back to your documents and look at just how many unnecessarily complex words kind of creep in to our writing. And we can easily get rid of those before we tackle the perhaps more difficult task of dealing with the jargon. So we've got a few more complex words before we deal with the jargon. I love this one, upon. What can we do with upon? All fees are based upon your circumstances. This was from a real example, real live in the world I saw. On, exactly. All are based on your circumstances. Absolutely. We don't need to speak Shakespearean, right? We can just say on. The next one, we often all use this unnecessarily complex word, amend, and it has a very easy English alternative. And the last one is one that I really enjoy replacing is subject to. Now, subject to is, I think you'd call it legalese. It's become a convention, and it's horribly complicated. So I want you to also type in eligibility is subject to these conditions. How could you rewrite that to not use is subject to? I'll give you another verbal example. The product is subject to fees. You could just say fees apply to the product. We must always try and replace subject to, because it's legally. So let's see what I had here. All fees are based on your circumstances. You may change any product. Amend just means change, nothing more, nothing less. Finally, you may be eligible if you meet these conditions. So we can always get rid of the subject to. It's not actually jargon. It's just an unnecessarily complex word. That's all it is. Right, so now we are ready for the jargon. So for each word, that jargon word, you need to kind of be intentional about it. And you need to decide if the client needs to know the jargon. Then you're going to use it and explain it. So you're going to keep that jargon word. And when you're deciding if a client needs to know a piece of jargon, you need to think about the whole customer journey or the whole client journey. So perhaps if that piece of jargon is reflected in a contract, it might be really important that the client knows what it means. Or if it's a very common, say, investment concept, it might be important that the client knows what it means. So you need to kind of play that role of an educator and educate the client of what that jargon actually means. If you find that a client doesn't need to know the jargon word, and maybe it's really useful to you as an expert, but the client doesn't need to know it, then you try and just give it a plain language alternative and not use it at all. So just to get some very simple examples, 2 words that probably the client might need to know are beneficiary and asset allocation. So beneficiary, a person or organization you choose to receive benefits from your plan or estate when you die. So I've defined or explained what that is. Another one, asset allocation, the spread of your investments across different types of assets, such as shares, bonds, and cash. So an explanation it's very nice to have it short, succinct, and easily saying what it is. But unfortunately, figuring out the definition or the explanation is actually just the first step. And I think probably a lot of us in the room have a wonderful glossary document. We have lovely, lovely glossaries we can search up on the internet. There's lots of glossaries. The problem is that people don't go to glossaries to find out what words mean. It's too much effort, really. So the rule when we're doing plain language is to try and include explanations in context. If we're saying that a customer needs to understand a concept, we try and put that explanation in context when we're talking to them. We try not to tell them, oh, well, you can go to this other document to find out what this really important word means. Because in reality, they're not going to do that really. We need to explain it in context. So there's 2 kind of options of how we're going to do this. The one option is to put the plain meaning first. So let's look at this sentence. You can choose who should receive the benefits from your plan when you die. This person or organization is called a beneficiary. So this is a very nice conversational way of explaining jargon, where we first get across the concept and then we say, well, by the way, this is what it's called. It's also a useful way if we have an acronym or an abbreviation. We use the spell out version and then we use the acronym or abbreviation. I like that. Can you explain that to insurance companies, please? Absolutely. So you can choose who should receive the benefits from your plan when you die. This person or organization is called a beneficiary. The other way to do it is to put the jargon word first and then the definition afterwards. So, for example, we'll use your objectives, time frame, and attitude to risk to decide your asset allocation. Then beneath that, asset allocation means. Now, this option is very well suited if you're writing to a client and you are not sure if they understand the term or not. Or this is maybe a template letter or a template piece of communication that is going out to lots of your clients. And you know that some of them might know what asset allocation means, but not everybody. So what you're doing here is, again, you're using this layering concept. You're saying, if you understand what asset allocation is, your client's just going to skim right past your definition and their reading isn't bothered by it. But you're putting the definition in for those clients that don't understand what asset allocation is. So we're producing a layered approach, and we're in a way giving the client the choice of either reading that explanation or not reading the explanation. So this option 2 of the jargon word first and then the definition is useful when there's a mix of readers, and some readers might know the word, some readers might not. The first option is more for when everybody needs an explanation of what the word is, right? Because you're explaining the meaning before the word. There's a comment that, yes, if only solicitors understand this. And it is kind of an interesting point. And one of the Emma at the beginning talked about my work for the ISO, or the British Standards Institution, on plain language. And there's a very good plain language legal communications set of standards that have just been published that I also hope solicitors also have a look at, because it's very interesting, and it looks at these kinds of ideas of layering definitions. Right, so now we're on to one of my favorite parts of plain language, because it's really fun to get right, and that's to write simple sentences. Before I look at these examples, I want to talk a little bit about literacy levels. I see a lot of headlines and things which say things like, 1 in 6 people in this country have a literacy level of 10 years old or 11 years old or 12 years old. And these are valid studies, and it is a way of looking at literacy. However, there is sometimes a little bit of nuance to that I want to talk a little bit about before we get into that. And that is, our literacy levels aren't set in stone. So we don't go to school and go to college and go to university and get a literacy level, and that kind of stays with us throughout our life. Our literacy levels, in fact, go up and down, even in the course of one day. And I want you to think of one time, and I'm sure this will have happened to everyone in the room, where perhaps a parent was ill and you were worried about a parent, or perhaps a child refused to go to school and it was very stressful, or perhaps you just didn't feel well, and you felt really ill, and you tried to look or read a document on your phone. So you had something to read on your phone, and you suddenly looked at your phone, tried to read some instructions, perhaps they're instructions for medication, perhaps it was a message from your bank telling you something you needed to do, and you just read it and it didn't go in. It just didn't go in. You just looked at it. And finally you looked at this letter and you almost had to go almost like read it aloud in your head really slowly to get you to understand it. I sometimes have it when I scroll through my contacts in my phone and I'm in a hurry, and I just might miss somebody's name because I just don't get it at that time because I'm in a rush. I'm distracted. Now, what's happening at that moment is our literacy level is going down, because when we're stressed or when we're distracted or when we don't feel very well, our literacy level drops. So we might have a doctorate, we might have an incredibly high literacy level, but at a moment of stress, our literacy level will go right down. And that happens to us every day. So when we're talking about sentence length and simple sentences, you might look at a sentence and go, well, everybody can understand that. That's not very difficult. But you need to think of it in the context of a client stressed about their money, somebody who's making a financial decision while they're bereaved. Their literacy level is not going to be as high as it would be when they're at their most energetic and most healthy. So always remember that even if your client is very educated, that they might be going through a time of day or a time of their life where their literacy level is lower. So with all of that, let's go into this. Use shorter, simpler sentences. So type in the chat, what should the average sentence length be? Under 10 words, under 20 words, under 30 words? What do you think? Under 20 or under 30. There's a question on the literacy level of how you know what the average literacy level of your target audience is, and I will answer that after I've given you the answer to this comment. Under 10 or 20, yes. So the kind of guidelines for English generally say fewer than 20 words a sentence. I can tell you, I personally, but this is my personal view and my consultancy view, is I these days try and stick to an average of about 12 words. And that's because a lot of people now read only on screens or even on their phones. So I think it comes down, but plain language will generally say 15 to 20 words, somewhere around that. What I do like to tell you is length isn't the full story. You also need to make your sentences simple. We're not going to talk too much about simple versus complex sentences in this hour because we don't have that much time. But if you think of a sentence like, I love cookies and cake and candy and sweets and vegetables and fruit, it's a very simple sentence. Even children of 4 years old can talk about a sentence like that. And it can be quite long because you can have and, but it's still quite simple. Whereas if you have a sentence that is in the passive voice, it can be quite complex, even though it's short. So sometimes length and complexity don't go exactly together. If you do write short sentences, though, they're more likely to be simple. Just to give you an example of what I mean by the active voice, and as I say, it's not really going through many of those examples here, but the active voice would be something like clients pay fees to financial advisors, something like that. Clients pay fees. Whereas the passive voice would be fees are paid by clients to financial advisors. You can hear how clunky that is. So generally complexity is passive voice, lots of what are called nested clauses. So we try and get rid of that complexity to keep simple and active in our sentences. The nice thing is if you write short sentences, they're more likely to be simple. There were two questions here about literacy that while we're talking about this, I'm going to address. The first one was around what is the average literacy level that we should write to? And, you know, it's generally we talk about writing for grade 8 level generally. I do want to just remind people, please don't think that these grade levels or these age levels have anything to do with actual levels of education at school, because they don't really. All there are measures of how long words are and how long sentences are. That's really, they shorthand for those things. So you're not saying, well, like you actually think everybody's only got a grade 8 level of education. That's not what you thinking. You are thinking about keeping sentences short and simple. So really, if you are using one of these tools that look at grade levels around 8, around Flesch Kincaid talks about it like 60 points. If you look at those readability scores, that's where you should be. Around 8. You are talking about, there was a question, should we look at the lowest expected literacy level in a general communication? I don't know what that lowest is. It's really difficult because, but I think a grade 8 is fine. If you were talking about at a very severely stressful moment, so perhaps if there's a communication of what to do because a loved one's just passed away or something really stressful that has happened, I would really try and even go even lower than that, because at that moment that person's literacy level is really low. They got a lot of cognitive load from other parts of their lives around them. So I would really go even lower than grade 8, but that's kind of the basic level that you go to. There's a question here. There is a difference between a 21-year-old at first meeting and a 65-year-old experienced finance professional looking to retire. Should we tailor to each client or group? If you can, you should, but try and think of your sentence level being different to your jargon. So you might have your 65-year-old, very experienced person. Now they know what asset allocation is. So you don't need to explain that to them. They really do understand that. They understand what a pension is. They understand what an annuity is. So perhaps I would tailor it and think about it like this. I think, I probably don't need to explain those concepts to them anymore. But I would always try and keep sentence length and sentence complexity as simple as possible for everybody, because nobody really wants a long, complicated sentence. And I wouldn't actually make that assumption around age and sentence complexity. But if you are absolutely sure your client knows the meaning of the words, that's where I would tailor it. But I would always keep my sentences as short, as simple as you can. I've never, in all my years of doing this, I've never heard any complaint about a sentence being too simple. Nobody complains about it. There's a question about AI. I'm going to take that at the end because there's I know we'll have to talk about AI. So let's go on to these examples now. I'm going to go back to the presentation for a bit. Right, so I've got a kind of a bit of a weird long sentence here, and you're going to tell me how you'll improve it. An offshore bond has been suggested because clients may be able to take tax-deferred withdrawals of up to 5% of the original investment each and every year, which is further explained in part 2, as well as make further investments into the bond, as well as place the bond in trust for children or grandchildren. How are you going to improve this one? Well, the first thing we do here, it's really difficult for me to just ask, how do you improve this? The first thing that we'll do is just put full stops in. And if you're writing something and you know that dreaded long, underline comes up in Word telling you your sentence is too long, or if you're just looking at it and it's too long and you're not sure how to simplify it because it just seems really complicated, the first thing we do, don't try and be fancy, the first thing we do is we just put full stops in, and already the communication is way better. Even if I've changed nothing else, just putting full stops in, it's something everybody can do, and immediately things get way, way better. An offshore bond has been suggested. Firstly, clients may be able to take tax-deferred withdrawals of up to 5% of the original investment each and every year. This is further explained in part 2. Secondly, clients can make further investments into the bond. Lastly, they may place the bond in trust. So just by that simple act of putting full stops in, I've already improved the readability hugely. I've brought the readability level way down just by adding full stops. But we can make it even better. A lot of you have got it in the comments by using bullet points. So when we have a complex sentence, we don't just try and leave out half the information. That would not be the right way to go. That's why plain language gets a bad name, right? When people say, well, just leave half of it out. Don't tell them that stuff. No, we're not doing that. We're just breaking things up. And I've used the word before here, layering information, so that we're making the information easier to consume, easier to grasp. We're not leaving things out. So this one, I did change the first bit to active. I've suggested an offshore bond because you may be able to, and then I've got my 3 points nicely in bullets. So it's first full stops, and then we can add bullet points. And somebody else has made a lovely, why an offshore bond, and then broken it up into 3 bullet points like that. Really nice way of doing that. What everybody's doing here is so important, is being creative around how you simplify, because there's many different ways of doing it. And as long as we're intentional, we will always achieve something better. The worst possible place is, well, this is really complex, there's nothing I can do about it. There's always some simplicity and that some simplifying that we can do. We sometimes have to be really conservative if something is very technical, so we'll be very conservative, but there's never really an excuse for a really long sentence. You can always shorten it in some way. Right, and I promised 45 minutes. I'm at 44 minutes on my clock before we start talking about questions a little bit more. So I'll go through the final concept here, which is really simple. This concept is giving support for decisions. And this is the first concept, I think, out of these 5, or the only concept, which is not only about how you say something, but about what you say too. And the idea is to really include a conversational aspect to every piece of communication. The idea is to slow things down and add a safety check. And we are always told to do this for people in vulnerable circumstances. We want to slow things down. We want to let people be okay about taking their time, about reading information in other places. And remember, that was one of our key questions or objections at the beginning when people said, like, how do I know I can trust this information when there's just so much out there? Well, one of the techniques we can use is to signpost support and always remind clients that they can pause and they can ask questions. So I have an example on the screen of how you could write something like that. I think this really, on the last webinar, if you attended the one on social media, I found it fascinating to just think about how many people are getting information from social media and how overwhelming it can be because there is just so much information out there now. And I think by using these very basic techniques of signposting support, reminding clients to contact you, to have a conversation with you, and do this explicitly. Don't think clients will just know they can do this, but be very explicit and intentional of how you word this. You can really help clients know that your information can be trusted above everything else that's out there. So that is really the 5 principles in 45 minutes. After this webinar, you will receive this checklist that's going to come to you. It's a 10-point checklist, and it's actually a Creative Commons checklist from an organization called Rightmark. And they've created a checklist that is a Creative Commons. And what that means is you can actually use this checklist and even brand it, with your own firm, as long as you acknowledge it and reference it like I have here. It's a really nice checklist because it's quick, yet it will help you cover the bases. And if you look at this checklist, it says above it, list your readers, describe the context, write down the questions that they will have, and write the intended or ideal outcomes for this document. So remember to think of that before you do the checklist. But you'll find that if you go through this checklist, you'll at least get a basis for understanding. And this checklist, I think, it does incorporate these 5 points we've discussed. It has a little bit more into, but it incorporates the 5 points we've discussed. And I think it'll just get everybody in the firm perhaps using some of these principles on everything that you do. So that's really the main points that I wanted to get across. I thought there was a question that I spied here further up that I said I'll get to at the end, and that was using AI. So somebody said, well, what kind of prompts, I think the question was, what kind of prompts can be used for AI? Sorry, I'm just reading the question here. It was put to me on using AI for content creation or content quality. There's 2 questions there. Content creation, the problem with many of the general purpose AI tools, so ChatGPT or Claude, is that they don't really know these principles for plain language, but you can guide them. So if you are using chat, as part of your prompt, you could say, make your sentences an average of 15 words long. Use active voice, not passive voice. Use a descriptive heading for every paragraph. Use sentence case, not title case. You can give these specific prompts, and then your output will be a lot better than if you just say something like, make this more readable. So I always say to people, please don't just say to AI, just make this more readable, because it doesn't really know what you mean by readable. It doesn't have any idea. So try and be as specific as you can with your prompt, and you will get some really good answers. A lot of people, you can imagine with my job, say, well, is it needed? And I always say you need to know the principles if you're going to use AI, because AI can't read your mind. It can't know what your audience wants. I would say, so you can use AI because you're going to prompt it properly, but there's another aspect that every single responsible practitioner of communication will be saying, and that's please don't forget to test key communications with your target audience. So after you've gone through this, please go to somebody else, a potential client. Maybe there's a client you know really well that you can test it with, or maybe you test it with someone in your family. All of this is better than doing nothing. And when you test it, you're not going to ask, do you like this? Because, everyone will say it's fantastic because they like you. But you'll say something like, if you would read this, would you change the allocation of your investment? Or you're going to ask a content related question to make sure that they understand the document. So with AI, yep, the answer is yes, use it, but please prompt it properly and then test with a real user too. I see another question. In your experience, do you find different layouts or styles help? For instance, justification and italics. So on the point of, thanks, Claire. So on the point of justification, so justification means where the text lines up. And if you think about it, you'll have come across two main ways of justifying. You'll have justification where everything lines up on both sides of the page. So there's a straight line on the left and there's a straight line on the right-hand side of the page. So let me, all my documents are plain language documents, so they're not. So this, I'm just holding up another document for you. This you can see from a distance, there's a ragged right-hand side. So in other words, the left-hand side is all straight and the right-hand side is ragged. That is generally the best way to lay out your document. And yes, it is better for many readers. The reason is we keep our place on the page through that jagged right-hand side. So we prefer a left justified, it's called in Word, rather than full justified, generally in plain language. There's always exceptions, but that would be the general rule. And yes, it does make a difference. In terms of italics is really often, a lot of people find italics quite hard to read. So it's absolutely fine to use with one or two words. So for instance, some people use italics for words that are defined, and that's actually fine to do, but don't put whole big paragraphs in italics, because italics are harder to read for many people than normal text. So don't overuse it. I'm seeing another comment there. I hope these answers are clear. So just let me know if they're not clear. Build and test prompt, then ask your AI what else it needs to know. Then save your final version as a template to reuse. And be aware of GDPR. Very good advice there. Thank you, Richard. So those are really, really good points to make. And I should have also emphasized, just be very careful of what you're feeding AI. So you cannot feed any client information into AI ever. And then it's just to add onto that at the end, please test with real people at the end, because AI is just a machine and it doesn't really know what real people will want. So make sure you've tested it too. I'll just wait a minute to see if there's any other questions. So I'll just finish off then. If there's no other questions, if you've got any, you're welcome to put them in. But just to finish off, you will get this checklist. And also, please write to me with any questions or any comments. There are, because of the new ISO and BSI standards in plain language, we have got new check marks, new certifications for plain language. I always say that if you're doing plain language, why not boast about it? Why not show people you're doing it? And there's lots of ways you can do that now. So please speak to me about how to show clients that you are making the effort, that you are complying with these plain language principles. And I am on LinkedIn, so I'm quite active on LinkedIn. So please join me. And if you've got any negative or positive comments about the session, please get in touch. I might be able to give you 4 minutes back into your diaries. Emma, do you want to just come back on?
I seem to have lost my camera for some reason, but thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. We've had some really good comments, really good interaction. Thank you so much, Frances. I think that was really useful, just things that people can take away and use straight away, which was the purpose of this webinar. So yes, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. Like you say, you'll get an email afterwards and you'll get a CPD certificate. So we'll leave it there.
Thank you very much, and have a wonderful, simple day, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.